All right, we will get started. Welcome everyone to our September Art Bites. I'm Kate Kunau, the curator of collections and exhibitions. I think it's the first time I've introduced myself with my new title. And I'm super happy to see everyone. I'm really excited about our Art Bites. We're talking about the 3 new Grant Woods that we've acquired in the last couple of months. So this is a really fun way to celebrate the end of our Grant Wood exhibitions. So yeah, we can get started. Let me share the old screen here. What am I doing with my life? There we go. Can everyone see that? I will take your silence as yes. All right. So just to start us out, before we get to our new acquisitions, I wanted to talk a little bit about the context in which we collect things at the CRMA. So 95% of our collection, roughly, it's probably actually a little bit higher than that, comes to us through donation. And so we have never had an enormous acquisition budget. And so the vast majority of things that we acquire as a museum come to us as gifts. And so that is a really cool part of our history, because that means that the things that are in our collection are the things that people in the community have collected. And so we are very much a reflection of Cedar Rapids, general Eastern Iowa, and the things, both the generosity of our community and the interests and things that people in our area collect, which I think is wonderful. Definitely helps us out fund-wise as well. Certainly, we probably would not have been able to purchase any of these 3 new woodworks that I'm going to be talking about today. But I just love that our collection is really a reflection of our community, both in theme and subject matter, but also it reflects the generosity of the people in our area. So as I said, this exhibition, or this Art Bites, is a reflection of the exhibitions, which of course we have extended. You can see the original dates for our Grant Wood Revealed exhibition here. It was supposed to end on May 16th, but we wanted to extend it over the summer. It felt really celebratory. We've had such a good reaction to it. We wanted it to be up over free summer so that the most people could see it. I will remind everyone that we're in our last week of Grant Wood Revealed. It's closing on Sunday, will be the last day to see it. And it's a really cool exhibition. It's 5 galleries. It's the most Grant Wood we've ever had up at one time. And so if you haven't seen it, or if you want to see it one more time before it goes, these are the last couple of days for us. And it was really interesting to me that all 3 of these new Grant Wood works came in during the time when we had this exhibition up. We, of course, were doing lots of PR about it, and we've been doing tons of programming, as most of you know. So I don't know, I've speculated with other people on staff if, you know, this kind of brought people out of the woodwork and reminded them that we have such an amazing Grant Wood collection. And of course, it's never a bad idea to donate a work to a museum that has that artist in great depth. So whatever it was, I'm very happy that these 3 works are now joining us. And hopefully today I'll be able to show them to you and kind of establish the context in which they're going to live in our collection. And of course, just reminders of what's up in Grant Wood Revealed, the wonderful Cherry series, which is up in near its entirety. All of Grant Wood's fun decor pieces, both his metalwork and interesting home pieces. So it's a really cool exhibition. But to get to the meat of what I am discussing today, this is our first new acquisition. To the correct page. So this is Old Crest from Peregro, painted in 1926. It's an oil on panel, as most of Wood's work are. He did some oil on canvas. That's probably the second most common, but the man loved a compressed wood panel. He was a spokesman for Masonite. He just really enjoyed painting on panel, and certainly a piece like this was done during the 3rd of his 4 trips to Europe that he took during the 1920s. It is much easier to pack panel pieces than it is canvas pieces going to and from Europe on boats. So it's definitely a practical choice, as well as he just really enjoyed painting on these panels. So this is a really cool piece, because in 1926, this was the year that Wood really got into painting doorways. And we have a number of those in our collection. The 1926 trip to Europe was also the trip where he had a big show, and Wood thought this show at the Galerie Carmine in Paris, this was the one that was going to launch his career. As you can see from this painting, this is when he's still working in the American Impressionist style that he started out in. Very loose, very brushy, a lot of attention to light and shadow. So Wood thought this show that he was having was really going to launch his career, and this was going to make him an artist. There were 37 works in this show, and only one of which was not described as a port or door. So this is really interesting because he gets so into painting doors during this 1926 trip. So this is our new acquisition, and these are the context in which it exists in our collection. So we have a fair amount of paintings from this 1926 trip. On the left here, this is the doorway, again from Peregro. It's known as, and on the right, we have Porte Clocher, which is from Saint-Emilion. So obviously, a lot of attention to detail, a lot of attention to the lights and darks and the way that like the shadows play in these very interesting doors. He's attentive to architecture. He does a lot in southwestern France. Both Peregro and Saint-Emilion are in various places in southwestern France. So it's fun to see these all come together. More door works from our collection, the barred door, Chancelade, and yellow doorway from Saint-Emilion. So again, this new piece that we're bringing in has a really strong connection to pieces that we already have and is a great addition to kind of his doorways of 1926. This is the one that I think our new acquisition resembles most strongly. And so the work that we have in this collection, the doorway from Peregro, so the one we have is actually a larger version that he painted in 1927 when he had returned to America. There is a work in a private collection. If you've been to see Grant Wood Revealed, you know we have the smaller private collection piece that is the initial version of this work. We have a larger version that he painted when he came home, but there is a smaller version that he painted in situ in 1926. So we have the larger version, but I just see a lot of similarities between these two works. Obviously, we're both looking at doorways from southwestern France, but his attentiveness to like the texture of the ground leading up to the doorway, the really interesting architecture that both of these doors have. Even though the palettes aren't particularly bright or shocking in either of these, he still does some really beautiful color work in both of them. So we're really excited to add this one to the collection because it fits in so well with things that we have. It's another example of work that he did during this very distinctive series in 1926. And I've always been a fan of Grant Wood's American Impressionist period. I think he's a wonderful Impressionist painter, and I'm always happy for more examples of that. Moving on to our next new piece. This is Woodland Waterfall from 1906. And for those of you doing math in your head, Wood was born in 1891, so he would have been around 15 years old when he painted this. And this is a watercolor. It's relatively small. It's around 11.5 by 8.5 inches height by width. It's in a really lovely frame. It's very well preserved, done really nicely. Amazing to consider that this is a watercolor that's over 100 years old. And so we have a number of really early woodworks in our collection. They're usually really hard to date, but God bless him, he dated this one 06. So we have no question about when this was painted. And this is a really cool piece that we're adding to the collection. I suppose I'll go forward. So we have a number of wood watercolors. Again, if you've seen Grant Wood Revealed, there's a whole wall of his early works. Watercolor really makes sense to me as something that Wood did early in his career, because obviously if you've done watercolor before, or perhaps you've had children, you know, watercolor, like it's cheap, it travels really easily. It's not as high maintenance as painting with oils or acrylics. Watercolor can kind of be done anywhere. So it's something that would have been very accessible to Wood as a young man. It was cheap, it's less messy. It's something that he could have had very easily to hand at home. So these are 3 watercolors that he does early in his career. Branch of Apples, which is obviously a much more finished work than the other 2. Daffodils and Beet, both roughly dated to 1904. Watercolor is really interesting because Wood doesn't really do it later in his career. We have one later watercolor that I'll show you in the next slide. But it's typically something that occurs early in his career. It's something that he does when he's younger, and you can see he's kind of working through it. He is actually a very good watercolorist. But it's not something that he really does as a mature artist. The one watercolor piece that we have that is not from his childhood is House with Blue Pole from 1924. And this is another European piece. He did this during his 1923-24 trip to France. And so you can see he's a very good technical watercolorist. He shows a lot of facility with the medium. But again, it's not something that he really does later in his career. So it's really fun to be able to add a watercolor to our collection because it's not an area that we're particularly strong in. We have, as I said, like these early pieces that are watercolor, but this is just such a wonderful finished work. And I've had a lot of fun speculating about the subject matter of this work, not just about the media. So if you're familiar with Grant Wood, you know he does a ton of paintings in and around Indian Creek here in Cedar Rapids and Marion. So these are three of the Indian Creek pieces: Basket Willows from 1920 on the top, Indian Creek Summer 1929 on the bottom, another Indian Creek to the right. So you can see that this idea of like trees surrounding water is something that he comes back to again and again in his career. Ooh, sorry, my mouse got crazy. But all of these paintings are from 1920 on. And so this painting from 1906 is really interesting. You know, is it something that he saw at Indian Creek? Is it something from another location? My thought off the top of my head is that it might be something that he copied from a magazine or a postcard, or it's a scene that he saw reproduced somewhere else that he did in watercolor. But it would be interesting to look into that and see if this is an actual location or something he might be reproducing from another media. But it obviously goes really well with his landscapes that we have in hand already. And so I think it's really lovely to have this kind of unusual and very early watercolor to pair along with the wonderful Indian Creeks that we have in the collection. And our third piece, this is a gift in process. We're still waiting for the final paperwork to come in. I will apologize on this one. This is an oil on paper. And it is under glass, so it is very hard to photograph for two reasons. Oil on paper is really, really reflective, and the glazing doesn't help at all. So I took these pictures this morning downstairs, and it's a real trick. We are hoping once we have final paperwork on this one, we can maybe open it up and see if there's any more information about the subject matter or any more information inside this frame. So this came to us as Grant Wood Paris Landscape Undated, an oil on paper and about 20 inches by 18 inches image size. Pardon me. So oil on paper, as I mentioned earlier, Grant Wood is an oil on panel man. And so the media is really interesting here. This is actually the only oil on paper that we will have in our collection. Obviously, he does works on paper. There are drawings, there are lithographs, lots of different things, but he very seldom does oil paint on paper. This is the only one I've ever seen, so it's an unusual choice for him. Panel and canvas were much more his thing. So this came to us titled Paris Landscape. And both Sean and I kind of looked at this, and it's a beautiful painting. It's really unusual for Wood. It's kind of monotone. There's a lot of blue. Again, I apologize for the photographs. It's a little bit hard to see. But the architecture really struck both of us as not being immediately Parisian. Like Paris did not immediately present itself to me with this kind of interesting Gothic architecture that we see in the background. So this title came to us as Paris Landscape, but my thoughts immediately went to Antwerp. And so Wood's first trip to Europe in 1920 with Marvin Cohn was largely spent in Paris. They started out in Montreal, Canada, took the boat over, disembarked in England, went across to Paris. But on the way back, when they're leaving in the late summer of 1920, they have to go from Paris to Antwerp, and they actually depart from Antwerp. And I have not seen any paintings that he did of Antwerp, but if you look at the cathedral and the very distinctive cathedral tower on the right-hand side of this right-hand picture, that to me looks really close to the tower that we're seeing on the right-hand side of the painting. And even before I was Googling images of Antwerp, Sean and I were speculating that this architecture just looked a little bit more little bit more Gothic, a little bit more Central European, Northern European than Parisian architecture looks. And so I started Googling, Belgian architecture and Antwerp specifically, and these things kind of suggested themselves. Obviously, this very distinctive cathedral spire, this is the Cathedral of Our Lady in Antwerp, is something that a lot of artists have treated. And I couldn't find anything that comes from exactly the same angle as Wood's painting. But the cathedral, as you can see from the work on the left here, it is by a river, it is by a body of water. And so going back to Wood's painting here, we can see that kind of fits and kind of clicks together. So I'm looking forward to doing more research on this, and perhaps if we're able to open the painting up, there might be more information for us there. But I was really excited when I saw this because that tower architecture just really looked correct to me. And so these are our 3 new Grant Wood works, 1 in process. We have just been thrilled to add them to the collection. They each add something really special to the Grant Wood works that we have. We have around over 200 Grant Wood works in our collection. We're really excited about the depth that we have, especially in his early pieces and all of the stories that we can tell about him as an artist. And every time we get a new piece, it adds another piece to the puzzle. It makes our story about Grant Wood that we have here that much more complete. And so when we get works like this that are all really unusual and distinctive and fit into these really specific parts of Wood's career, it just makes me really excited. Like, they're each in their own way just a really spectacular part of Wood's story, and they're so cool. So I'm really excited to use them in upcoming exhibitions. Of course, we have our big Wood exhibition that's closing now, but we always use Grant Wood. Not only do we have our dedicated Grant Wood gallery, but we use him the same way we use the rest of our collection. If we do a thematic exhibition, I like to put Grant Wood in. We had some of his watercolors up in the watercolor exhibition. We do American Artists Abroad. I've used Grant Wood. So he's definitely like a working part of our collection. So I'm really excited to see what the future holds for these 3 paintings. And again, I love so much what this says about our community, that, these have just kind of come out of the woodwork in the last couple of months, and people associate us with Grant Wood. And it's such a generous thing to do, to want to share works like this with the public, where they can be seen and appreciated, and live in context as part of like the artist's larger story. So this has been a really fun couple of months to have all of these works come in and to be able to fit them into our collection and see how they're going to enhance Grant Wood's story. So I would be happy to answer questions if anyone has any, or observations, or which painting you liked the best. All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions, so I will just say thank you everyone for joining us today, and definitely come in and see Grant Wood revealed before it leaves us on Sunday. But thank you all so much for being here.
Katie?
Mm-hmm.
How many doors? I know Marvin Cohn painted doors.
Mm-hmm.
Grant Wood painted a lot of doors also.
Grant Wood painted a lot of doors in 1926 during this really specific trip to Europe that he did. Marvin Cohn's doors primarily come from his 1938-39 sabbatical from Coe College. So yeah, they both had a door period, but at very different times.
They're beautiful.
Aren't they? They're really lovely.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for being here.